Hi, everybody. You are listening to Judging Meghan with your host, Meghan Judge. I don't even know how to start this podcast because I've been off for a few weeks and I keep saying, like, I wanted to so badly when I came back to you all in the new year to say Happy New Year. And instead, I'm seeing my beautiful city, Los Angeles, being burnt. So if I'm emotional on this podcast, I really couldn't imagine a better guest to come on and maybe help me through a little bit of this selfishly. I'm fine. So for all my listeners and people that reached out to me on Instagram, thankfully my family lives in Manhattan Beach. So we are one of the cities, like, knock on wood, because there's zero containment in this fire, that has not been affected. And I get even nervous saying that. I know multiple people that have lost their homes. They've been burnt to the ground. And when I think about that, my heart breaks. This is a time, if you're listening in the United States or you're listening anywhere, please donate. Pacific Palisades is a very affluent area of Los Angeles, but there's places that have been burnt all over Los Angeles and people need help. Also, what kind of breaks my heart is, and again, social media is so great in so many ways, but it's also so toxic, is when I go on and I see people writing about celebrities and people that have financial means, that they don't matter because they are okay financially. And honestly, that's not fair, because I'm going to use myself for as an example. I had my dad, when I was in fourth grade, won this teddy bear. I'm looking at Julie, who, by the way, listeners, her name's Julie. So that's also a reason why we're talking today. My dad won this bear for me at bingo when I was in fourth grade. And I loved this bear. And I kept it with me when I drove all the way from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles when I moved here. And somebody somehow, I got in a fight with a friend. It was drama in my 20s. And the friend took the bear and threw it away. And I've always been traumatized by it because I lost this bear and I've always wanted it back. It was probably a bear from a drugstore. Who even knows where it was from at this bingo game? But my point of the story is, there's a lot of people missing their teddy bears, and it shouldn't matter if people have money or not. Yes, the people that don't have money and are terrified how they're going to pay for food. Yes, that is so important. But please, if you're thinking about writing messages that people don't matter because they have financial means, that's not fair. We all matter in this world, and we should all be treated accordingly. We've all been put here for a reason, and we all deserve acceptance.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Meghan.
I want to introduce Julie Kramer. Julie is a shamanic healer, and I keep saying it wrong, so you're going to correct me on that because I've been known to butcher things, and a teacher. Julie, did I say that wrong again?
No, you didn't, Meghan. Shamanic. You said it correctly.
I'm so grateful to have you on the podcast. As I said, we spoke. We had a really long, hard process trying to get the podcast going because there were sound issues. But I talked to you briefly this morning because you said you were kind enough to call me to say, are you okay to record? And this is, I think, when it's best to record, is so we can connect and have the human experience, which I think is so important for probably what you do and what I do as well. And maybe, just maybe, that's why I do this podcast. This is a form of grief, It's a form of loss. And that's why I do the podcast, is to help people that are going through painful things in life. Anyway, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with, let me ask you this. Do you have any thoughts that you can share about what's going on? I mean, just in the world in general. I don't want to get political, and I haven't asked you where you live or anything. I know a few things about you, but just there's a lot of negativity in the world right now, and it's a very scary place. It just feels like there's so much hate and pain and wars, and I just wanted to get your feedback on what you think is going on. Why is this happening? And then on top of this, starting the new year with this fire, it just kind of feels like a very hopeless place right now. And I always try to think of the glass half full.
Mm-hmm. And yet I could imagine that not only given what you're facing as a part of the Los Angeles community, but also globally at a much broader scale, it's very difficult to preserve a sense of hopefulness day in and day out. And I think that's where those of us who feel inclined to and inspired to consider the possibility that there are benevolent helping spirits and that they're holding us with love and care and tenderness and compassion, whatever unfolds within the human realm, if you will. And I think that can help lend a sense of hopefulness, especially during our darkest moments.
I love that, because I think it's important. Can you explain for my listeners and myself exactly what a shamanic healer is?
Yes, of course. So, of course, I mentioned a moment ago the presence of helping spirits. So the most important underlying premise when it comes to a shamanic healer or a spiritual healer, I use those terms interchangeably, is the idea that there can be imbalances or even illnesses on a spiritual level, on the soul level, for example, that can affect our well-being. And someone who is a shamanic healer or a spiritual healer works in partnership with benevolent, trusted helping spirits in order to address those underlying issues, which are invisible and are not typically a part of our approach to wellness or well-being, at least not currently, although historically that was certainly not the case. But in our current medical system, for example, we don't include spiritual wellness as part of an integrated approach to well-being, and that's the work that a spiritual healer or shamanic healer focuses on.
Okay, I believe in that stuff, by the way. So people might be listening and be like, whatever. I mean, you're probably listening to the wrong podcast if that's how you feel, because I think we should always be open to new ideas and healing. I know that I personally, and I love to use myself, carry around a lot of anger, like a lot of anger. I'm very angry about things that have happened in my life. And I've realized that, I don't know how to get rid of that pain and that anger that I hold so tightly. And I wonder if what you're kind of what you can help me with this question is this like spirit guides? Is this people because I do believe we have guides, because I've done multiple episodes and come back, like our souls come back, I think. Is that kind of along the lines of what you're talking about, is healing that inner soul? Can you go into that a little more?
Yes, I'd love to, Megan. And first, if I may, to speak to what you shared a moment ago about the anger that you feel about what's happened to you, and probably some of the anger that you feel has to do with what's happened to others, people you care about, but also what's happening to so many others at this particular moment in time, certainly in the Los Angeles area, but elsewhere in the world, as you mentioned, so much devastation and suffering. And I think it can be confusing to try to make sense of the possibility that there are benevolent helping spirits and how that can possibly coexist with human suffering that we visit upon each other In other words, the harm we cause one another, but also devastating things that happen like a fire or a tsunami. In other words, natural disasters as well, not caused by humans per se. Well, perhaps ultimately, in terms of climate issues. But I mean, as opposed to my hurting you or you hurting someone else directly. And I think this is where it's important for us to consider that having a helping spirit or a spirit guide, or someone might say a guardian angel, doesn't mean that we're protected from every kind of harm that exists here on planet Earth. We're not protected from everything that can happen between and among humans and as part of this natural ecosystem. In other words, that doesn't mean that there won't be pain. It doesn't mean there won't be loss. It doesn't mean there won't be suffering. But I think there's a part of us that wants to feel that if we have a spirit guide or a helping spirit, that they'll protect us and that nothing hurtful, nothing bad will happen to us. And part of what I try to do is partner with the helping spirits, come into a relationship with them where I'm not adopting a childlike position and asking them to protect me like a parent would or should, but rather a collaborator. We're partnering together to support my well-being and to support the well-being of others. So I try to enter into that relationship from a place of maturity on my side, recognizing that I'm here, as we all are, in my opinion, to evolve. This is the human laboratory of evolution, and some of that human evolution obviously comes about by way of devastating loss and tragedy.
Can I ask you, because I'm sure you must get this question and people might go, what are you talking about? Because you were saying like within the medical community, for example. So I'm assuming you deal with like a lot of people that are sick or, people that are blocked, that energy. Are you able to like see spirits? How were you able to tap into this, I would say, gift? How were you able to tap into that?
Well, I think it's our human birthright. I think it's very natural for us to have relationships with the unseen. I think we have certainly become distanced from that, but that doesn't mean that it's only available to the precious few or the special few. I think it's available to everyone. And it's amazing because although, as you can imagine, I certainly do encounter a fair bit of skepticism in terms of how people respond to the work that I do, what's also true is that once people realize that I'm a normal person and a decent person and the same person, and they get comfortable with me and start to relax a little bit around me, it's amazing how even some of the most skeptical people have had experiences of the unseen and how common that is. And people will start remembering instances. And sometimes it will be something very overt because as much as it's true that even if you may have a beautiful, benevolent spirit guiding you and caring for you, hurtful things may still happen. Sometimes the helping spirits intercede and do prevent harm or protect you from harm. And people have had experiences where they've heard a voice telling them not to get on an airplane or not to drive their car that day or not to go to that person's house or whatever. And then, of course, a very common phenomenon, people often experience visitations from loved ones. So receiving a visitation, let's say, from your grandmother who's passing away before her death or at the time of her death or afterwards, if you're all the way across the country. It's very common that people have these kinds of experiences. But of course, what I'm saying is that those are real, they're valid, they contain wisdom and information, they're important, they have meaning. And they can provide course correction and wisdom and guidance that we need in our lives.
How specifically do you work with someone? Do you have like I would love to know that. So is it like meditation? What is the form? If I were somebody and I came to you and I was looking for some healing, how exact, I mean, you don't have to tell me the secret sauce, but just tell me like bits and pieces. So for my listeners and myself, if they're looking for guidance or they're kind of at a loss in life or feel stuck. Can you kind of talk about that?
Certainly, yes. Well, I will say that I don't see clients myself at this point because I train people to become spiritual healers.
Okay.
So the focus of my work is on providing professional trainings so that people can offer this work to others.
Okay.
But of course, that comes out of my having done so for many years. And just like you were saying earlier, yes, people reach out to a shamanic healer, spiritual healer, with any manner of symptoms. So because people feel stuck, because they're experiencing loss or grief, because they're experiencing a lack of resolution, things not moving forward, because they've experienced trauma. They may have a physical ailment, in other words, a disease process or an illness. They might feel that they're suffering from a chronic emotional state that isn't healing, or something is keeping them from expressing their sense of purpose, their creativity, and I would say, their medicine in the world. People often feel separate from, if you will, a sense of purpose. And so they're seeking guidance about what they're here to do and what their part is to play. And so people come with all manner of issues, needs, concerns, symptoms. And the secret sauce is actually really simple and straightforward, surprisingly so. So I work using natural trance states. Behind me there's my drum, and on my rattle's next to me. Here's my rattle. And so I use drumming, rattling, singing, dancing, and whistling to create a trance state. Basically, what those things do is shift the brainwave activity and bring about a theta state. So the brainwave activity shifts from beta to alpha to theta. And in that theta state, we're simply more aware and can thus be contacted by helping spirits and contact them directly. We can experience them directly using our subtle senses. And although I would say the helping spirits are around us all the time, we're often unaware of their presence, and we often overlook their presence. And so entering into an altered state with the intention of contacting helping spirits is a way for us to turn towards them and to turn our attention towards them and receive guidance and healing from them. And this is a practice called a shamanic journey.
So let me ask you this, because when you gave that list of things, I was like, oh, box checked. And I'm very open with my listeners about my own. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, lot of loss in my life. And a few years ago, I got diagnosed with this. And I've tried EMDR, a lot, like all kinds of therapy. I've done Reiki. Is it kind of along the lines of Reiki, but more so intense because you're getting into that state of transic state, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, it's so interesting, Meghan, that you would mention that because, of course, my being here with you today and having the privilege of having this conversation with you and with your listeners came about quite unexpectedly over the course of the last couple of days.
Thanks, Beth Grossman. Thanks, Beth Grossman. I love you. By the way, listeners, Beth Grossman is like the best. I love her. She's a publicist I work with all the time, and there's nobody better in the world. I adore you, Beth. If you listen to this, anyway, sorry, I had to say that.
Yes, of course. So neither one of us has had a great deal of time to get to know one another. Yeah. Because we haven't had a lot of time to prepare. And so what I did before coming on with you today was I just rattled, which is what I do. And of course, having been doing this work, I was introduced to shamanism in 2000. And so entering into a trance state at will with a specific intention and then leaving that state, returning to an ordinary state of consciousness is very typical for me, very normal for me. And so it's very easy for me. So I was rattling and asking the helping spirits, what would be most appropriate and beneficial today, given the fires, and also just given this moment in time, what's needed? And the helping spirits asked me to talk about soul loss. And if I may, I'd love to explain what that is, because it does relate exactly to what you just shared.
Please do. Please do. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Meghan. So just to take a moment to try to understand, the terms soul loss and soul retrieval, I think, have become more commonplace and more widely used. And I would attribute that to my teacher, Sandra Ingerman, that I learned that work from, and much of the work that I do from. And what soul loss describes is the phenomenon where part of the soul essence becomes separated from the soul, and it leaves and goes into, in our language, if you will, the invisible realms or the unseen world. Why that happens, though, is very intriguing and very relevant to what's unfolding in California right now. That happens in anticipation of trauma. So it's actually a very intelligent form of self-preservation on the part of the soul being the animating force of our human incarnations. But when that soul loss takes place and that soul essence is missing and isn't restored right away, which generally it isn't, because it's not as though there are first responders out there tending to people medically and spiritually. They're only tending to people medically, which is beautiful, and bless them. And wouldn't be wonderful if there was also a team of spiritual healers working alongside them.
100%. Yes.
That would be the ideal in my world. So what happens is that because the soul fragments in anticipation of the trauma, and then the trauma occurs, the person who suffered the trauma is experiencing the effects of the trauma, but they're also experiencing the symptoms associated with part of their soul being fractured, because that causes symptoms. Now, interestingly, the symptoms are things like prolonged grief, lack of resolution. That can even be a prolonged coma, where literally more of the soul essence is outside of the body than inside the body. Also, PTSD can be a symptom of soul loss. Memory loss can be a symptom of soul loss. And so what's often needed in these situations is, yes, there may be medical care that's needed. Yes, EMDR. Yes, Reiki. Yes, other beautiful forms of psychotherapy and psychiatry. And what if, even though we've done all of those things, there continues to be a lack of resolution? And what many people report when it comes to experiencing soul loss is that sense of having crossed a threshold. I was never the same again after that fire, or after that death, after I lost my beloved friend, or after I lost my mom. And sometimes soul loss can happen because part of us wants to go with the person who's died.
Oh,
and
sorry, I'm getting upset.
Doesn't come back on their own. Yeah.
I have soul loss. I just got the definition because I have memory loss. That all makes sense. That all pieces together when you try to find, sorry, I get emotional sometimes, when you try to find all the different forms of fixing yourself, and then you can't, it's just not, like, my soul, I think, like, left my body when I lost Julie. Yeah. My best friend. I don't think it will ever be the same. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm crying. It's just everything at once today. Yeah.
Oh, it's fine, but I'm so sorry for this.
Yeah. I mean, my listeners know this story, but I lost her 21 years ago, and I've truly never been the same. So for somebody like me, how would you work? Again, I'll use myself. How would you work with me?
Yes. So if you were my client, and of course I'm not in any way sharing this to provide you with a diagnosis,
yes, 100%
here on your podcast. Yeah. And what's also true is that people do have that inner sense of knowing. And I also feel that's trustworthy. And yet, in the work that I do, it's not the practitioner, interestingly, that provides the diagnosis, if you will. It's the helping spirits. And so if you were my client, we would schedule a session and you would share with me what you just shared, that ever since Julie's passing 21 years ago, that we've never felt the same since. And that the grief is as acute as it was then. And that I would go to the helping spirits with that information and ask them what's needed here in order to help Meghan regain her sense of wholeness, which doesn't mean that you ever stop missing Julie, and yet has that loss compromised your sense of wholeness in a way that she wouldn't want for you. Because, of course, sometimes we're grieving out of our deep care for the person that we've lost as a way to honor them.
Yeah.
When, of course, I would imagine that they want us to be well and to thrive, even in their absence.
So what does a session look like? So do you teach the healers and the teachers to do multiple sessions? Like when somebody comes to you and they start ugly crying like I just did, do you say, here's what this looks like, or how many sessions, or does it work like that? Or is it just like a case by case situation?
Very much case by case. And my experience has been that the helping spirits will diagnose what's needed in the order of priority.
Okay.
And that's helpful because obviously we want to address what's most acute or most chronic first. And what's also true is that sometimes things happen in an unexpected order. And so I've learned to trust the helping spirits, that they know what's needed. But it's very hard to predict how many sessions will be needed. I could say, yes, we could complete a soul retrieval in the course of a single session, certainly. And sometimes there's more than one soul retrieval that's needed because there might have been multiple traumas in a person's life. And because we haven't been tending to our spiritual well-being ongoingly, there can be an accumulation of spiritual illness. And that's something that is very common and very typical. I don't certainly say that to frighten anyone, but rather simply to acknowledge I'm 51. If I had spent my whole life not attending to my spiritual well-being and just started to do that now, it might take a while to unravel what had accumulated. I started when I was in my 20s. There was still plenty to undo by that time. And so that's what I teach my students to do, is to provide a variety of spiritual healing techniques to address the different kinds of spiritual illness that can occur. And I was thinking specifically about soul loss and soul retrieval because of the fire, because there will be people who have to leave their homes and all of their belongings and their sense of community and their sense of safety and everything that's known and familiar in a heartbeat in order to save their lives and the lives of their families. And so there will be people who experience soul loss as part of this process. Not everyone will. Not everyone is as susceptible to that, but some will. And mostly what I want those people to know is that help is available to address that, because although all of the other levels of tending will probably happen straight away, medical care and psychological and psychiatric care and so forth, hopefully, and to your point, may those who feel inspired to donate and send blankets and everything, housewares and clothing and all that will be needed for those who have lost their belongings, will deal with things physically, emotionally, and psychologically. But will we deal with things spiritually? And often that comes later.
Well, okay. So going backwards a little bit, this is something that's been around. I don't how long. I mean, for forever, right? And it's something that was used, and people were, I think, in a much better place when this was used. And then it's kind of like been blocked out, and we just keep advancing as people with our little mini computers in our hands and all of these things that get us distracted, and the hate and all this stuff. So I'm wondering if when people come to you, it's kind of like a last stop.
It very often is.
Okay.
Yes, there very often is a quality of desperation.
Yeah.
because they've tried everything and nothing has worked.
I feel like that's me. I mean, I'm very open. I feel like I will be talking to you to get a healer after this is over. Because I believe in everything you're saying, that we just all get blocked. And if we're holding on to this negativity and this anger and yelling and all of this stuff, it's really hard to keep going in life and want to keep going, you know? And I think that there's more people that feel like I do right now than there are people that feel like you do right now. So I think this shift that you're talking about is so much needed. If we had more of what you do in the world, think about how wonderful it would be. You know, I mean, it's so needed. And that's part of why I really wanted you to come on, because I know there might be somebody that's listening and they're skeptical. I mean, I have done numerous episodes about tapping into spirituality. I think it's so important, but we all get blocked. And we all get to a place where we're like, do I really believe that? It's kind of like how I feel about my faith. You know, I mean, a lot of people don't agree with organized religion or, you know, whatever your faith is. But for me, my faith is super important to me, because in my head, I feel like that's my way of connecting with my dad and my sister that passed and Julie. So I have to hold on to that hope. And I think it's really important. But does it mean that I don't feel blocked all the time? I do. And I think there's a lot of really unhappy people. And like you said, from the fires, there's probably going to be more anger. Like, why me? You know, there's so many why me's in life but like I think you said in the beginning, and by the way, I totally skipped over my beginning question where I'm like, hi, Julie, you had me at hello. Let's talk about me, where I talk about you and your life and why you got into that. So I'm going to do that in a second. But I just have to say that if we don't all work on ourselves, don't you kind of feel like we're cheating ourselves in life? Like really having the human experience of being on this planet for, you know, 75, 85, 100 years, if we're lucky. If we don't work on ourselves and that side of ourselves, then we're really just half working on ourselves. You know?
Yes. Well, you can imagine that I certainly feel that way. Perhaps I'm biased, but I certainly feel that way. And there's very much an emphasis in my work on human potentiation and evolution. Several years ago, I guess now it's been about 13 years, I decided to focus my attention on healers, to train healers, to help them become potentiated so that they can then help their clients and eventually their own students become potentiated. But I also wanted to focus on healers so that they would become more resilient, because I wanted to explore the evolution of the archetype of the wounded healer. And although I understand and have certainly had my own experiences of wounding as a healer and have seen ways in which that has helped me become a more compassionate person, a more empathetic person, and so forth, it also made me very porous. And that could be debilitating, especially in the face of others' pain and tragedy. So how do we become resilient enough to be able to help whomever is in need at this given moment in time? Because our time will come. It's not my turn today, but it could be my turn in an hour when I'm going to be the one who's in need. And right now, it's the turn of all of those people in Los Angeles. No one is immune to that. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter what kind of work you do. No one is immune from loss, devastation, tragedy, and pain. And healers are those who say, I'm going to lend a hand. They're the spiritual first responders, except they're not always there at the time when the trauma or the tragedy is unfolding, because like you said, it's often the last stop on the train out of a sense of desperation. But ultimately, yes, I would say the work that I do in partnership with the helping spirits is all about human evolution. I feel that's what we're here to do.
I agree with you. Can we talk about you? because I've talked a lot about what you do, but I now want to talk, and I usually do it in the opposite direction, but today we're just in the upside down world. Let's be real. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and why you went into this and where you're from, which I always ask in the beginning and I'm asking now.
Yes. Well, I should say I'm currently living in Canada, which is where I was raised, but I'm newly back in Canada after having lived in the States for over 20
Can
years.
I come? Can I move in with you? I'm ready to go. My suitcase is packed. It's on my bed. Yes. Having dual citizenship at this time is very helpful. Okay. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So I lived in Colorado with my wife, Tammy, whose company Sounds True is based in Colorado.
Oh, that's amazing. I love Colorado. It's so pretty. So that makes sense. I always love Canadians. I just do. I love your people. My Canadian listeners, I love you. I don't think I've ever, I'm not going to lie. I'm not kidding. I don't think I've ever met somebody from Canada that I don't like. It's something about your people. Canadians are good people. They're good eggs, right? Mm-hmm. They just are. They I don't know what it is, but I truly love Canadians. So going backwards a little bit. So why, I know you said about 13 years ago, you shifted into like being a teacher, and I might be wrong with those dates, but why did you decide, like, how did you tap into this gift and why did you decide to go into this? Because it's such a niche thing.
Very.
Yeah.
Yes. That's an interesting question. It was at once surprising and not surprising, I would say. I was a child who was very dreamy, and I took refuge in nature because I didn't feel consistently safe within my family system. Mm-hmm. And so I was the child that would go across the street and climb the cedar tree and read a book while perched on a branch at the top of the cedar tree in order to not be at home and to not experience the dissonance, the disharmony that was present at times in my home, which as a sensitive child was very destabilizing for me. And I would say that I was a child who was at once very curious about the spirit world, although I don't know how I ever came to know any language about that. In other words, there weren't people in my life talking about that, but I was always drawn to the books about spirits and ghost stories and that sort of thing. But of course, a lot of what I took in was frightening in nature. Mm-hmm. So I had this interesting mixture of curiosity and fearfulness. And then there were these occasional moments when there was confirmation, one of which came, funnily enough, through my beloved grandmother, who took me to a psychic, Mrs. Seaman, here in British Columbia when I was 14. And I still have the recording of that conversation. And even then, at that age, I now know, although I didn't realize it until I listened to the recording as an adult, because I'd forgotten, I had started to hear the voices of my helping spirits as a child. I thought I was hearing the voice of my future husband. Of course, I married a woman, not a man.
Well, you were really off on that one.
I was completely off about that. But I didn't have any other way of explaining it. And then I went to this psychic because of my dear grandmother, who said, you have a helping spirit, and his name is Standing Pine, and he was your father in another life, and he is always with you and always protects you. And just in saying his name, I can feel my goosebumps and feel his presence. He is one of the helping spirits that flanks me all the time. He's always with me, always near me. And so, of course, I had begun to hear his voice, even as a child. And yet I didn't have a way of making sense of that, explaining it, understanding it. But my grandmother and also my stepmother had a curiosity about the spirit world. And so there were occasional conversations. It certainly wasn't pathologized, although we didn't enter into that conversation in any depth, I would say. But there was certainly permission. And then, by way of a series of synchronicities, I ended up at a retreat center here in Canada called Hollyhock, which is on Cortes Island. So it's sort of Canada's Esalen, if you will. And I worked there for a time. I worked at the front desk, and I was able to go to any workshop that I liked. And of course, they were teaching all sorts of things. There were teachers, presenters who were teaching on a variety of topics. And this particular workshop was being offered, a 2-day workshop on shamanic journeying. I had no idea what it was. I had never heard the terms shamanic or shamanism in my life. And yet off I went. I was very drawn, and actually, I don't know how long of a story to tell, but if I may just briefly.
No, I love it because I love this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, it was someone who called the registration office who persuaded me to go to the workshop. This woman called and said, I come to Hollyhock every summer. This is my gift that I give myself every summer to have time away from my family, time to myself. And this year I'd like to do something about shamanism. And of course, my job was supposedly to know what the different offerings were. And I was really just reading from the catalog sometimes because there were things that were unfamiliar to me. And I was 25 years old. And by the end of the conversation, she had persuaded me that I should go to this workshop. And I had already felt quite drawn to it. And so I confided in her that I was also interested in one of the ones that she was considering. She knew much more about shamanism than I did. And she said, oh, you should definitely do that one. And then she said, oh, well, I'll come and say hi when I come to Hollyhock. So she was going to be coming later that summer. I'll come visit you. And people often did that. They would make a connection on the phone and book a trip, book a retreat, and then come and say hello and introduce themselves when they arrived, because I was the one welcoming them at the front desk. She never came, and her name was not in the database, even though she said she had been there repeatedly for years and years and years. There was no trace of her. She completely vanished, and yet played this incredibly significant role in my life, because I then went towards this one workshop that was very skills-based. Here's how to enter into a trance. Here's how to embark upon a shamanic journey. Here's how to contact helping spirits. And there they all were, just waiting for me.
Oh my gosh. So do you think I believe in that stuff? Because you said, I've told this story probably before on the podcast, but I think that it's what you have as a gift, and it's tapping into the gift, and there's messages. So I wonder, like, that's some kind of spirit kind of like putting, I mean, I know you know that, putting you in the direction of where you're supposed to go, right? I've told this story before. One time I was on an airplane. I think you brought this up in the beginning, and I used to be terrified of flying, like terrified. Mm-hmm. And I would say like things over and over, like the plane's going to crash, and I would freak out. And I had a job, and I had to fly pretty often at the time. And I've told this story, and sometimes when I tell it, I'm like, people are going to look at me like I'm crazy, but whatever. I don't even care at this point. I have like 5 good years left. That's a joke. But I looked out, and like I had mentioned, I lost my dad when I was 13, and he used to call me baby doll. And I looked out of the window, and I could hear his voice, and I could see him. And he said, "You're going to be okay." And I literally, after that, I know this, people probably don't believe it, but I was okay. I wasn't the nervous flyer. I mean, I still don't love flying, but I wasn't the same flyer I was before. So I think when you have this, which you have, it's being able to tap into it and being okay with it. People judging you, who cares? We're all getting judged on this planet. We're all judging each other, but people really just care about themselves. I'm not saying in a selfish way, but we're all worried, like, what are we going to eat later? You know, they might think something for 5 minutes, but then they're just not your people. You know, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, what's going on? Maybe I'll turn this off. Then maybe this just isn't something you want to listen to. But I believe if you tap into this stuff, it's pretty incredible, because I can tell you, I promise you that story, I was a completely different flyer after that. So when you talked about your spiritual guide, what's the name?
That one in particular is Standing Pine.
Which is so beautiful that when you talk about it, I could see, if you're watching this on YouTube, your kind of like physical change, that you connect so deeply to that. Mm-hmm. But you believe there's other spiritual guides as well.
So certainly. Many. Oh, goodness. Yeah. Oh, he's just one of many, yes, that I have and that everyone has, in my opinion. And we have them, again, I feel we have them whether or not we choose to turn towards them. They're there anyway. And that's what's so intriguing, is that they don't seem to hold it against us when we don't choose to turn towards them. And yet when we do, like anything, I think it is a gift. Yes. I also think that it's a very common gift. I think that we're all, if you will, permeable to the divine. We're spirits in human form. Mm-hmm. And if we think of ourselves, if we identify simply as human, then of course that concept seems very foreign. But I feel we're spiritual beings in human forms. And so these are simply spiritual beings who don't happen to have forms at this time. And that affinity is so strong and ancient, as you said. And so there's a naturalness to it and an easefulness. And it's also a skill. And so I've also worked really hard and practiced really hard. And that's also true. And I would say the same would be true of interviewing people and playing tennis and making a really good Caesar salad. You improve with practice, you become honed with practice. And so I did decide, this is how I'm going to evolve. This is how I'm going to spend my life. This is what I'm going to devote myself to on any scale. Doesn't matter if it's just a few people, if it's a couple of dozen people, doesn't matter. This is what feels authentic. This is what feels alive. This is what makes the world make sense to me. To me, being human only makes sense when I'm in relationship with the spirit world. Mm-hmm. Because to me, the human condition, if you will, the human experience is finite. And part of what I experience with the spirits is what is infinite, what is eternal, what is there in a way of continuity. How come the consciousness of your Father was made accessible to you in his voice? You can't fabricate that experience. And that's where faith turns into conviction. You described yourself as a person of faith. Mm-hmm. I would say you sound like a person of conviction, because you had an experience that you know you didn't make up. You know it came as a gift from grace. You know it was your Father, and it changed things for you. And actually, a lot of people have experiences like that, and often they're just not comfortable talking about it. And so it's so powerful what you're doing, telling your stories and inviting others to tell their stories, because it gives everyone permission to tell theirs, most especially the hidden parts of the story.
Yeah. I think also I love, and I say this all the time when I have people come on, earlier, but when we talk this morning, I say this, sometimes I'm not in the mood to do a podcast, and it's not because LA is burning down. It's because I just I'm in a bad headspace, or I'm struggling that day. And every single time I do the podcast, when I feel like I'm called to do it, because I could have easily been like, you know what, Julie, let's reschedule. I don't want to do this today. I feel like that's kind of a higher power telling me, because this conversation has really helped me today. And I thank you for that. Mm-hmm. But also what I love about our conversation and talking to you is how incredibly at peace and joyful you are in what you do and what you're doing with your life. And the purpose of your life. And I say this a lot, is living a purpose-driven life is really important. I would love to know, I just a few last questions, what your wife thinks of this. Does she practice this as well?
No, she doesn't. Okay. Although she's very, very supportive beyond measure, I would say. And my choice in Tammy came by way of my helping spirits. When I met Tammy, which also happened, interestingly, at Hollyhock, the same place where I was introduced to journeying and where I now teach my programs at Hollyhock. We also have a home there, a cottage on this beautiful island, Cortez Island.
Well, tell your wife that you're inheriting a new person into your cottage. I will be now attending Hollyhock and also living there. But go on. You're making it sound really nice right now. Go on.
Well, when I met Tammy at Hollyhock, totally unexpectedly, And without ever having been in relationship with a woman and thinking of myself as a straight person, so a lot happened in a very short period of time. What clarified for me what I was experiencing, because I could tell that there was something of great magnitude occurring when I met her, but of course I didn't know what or why or how. And my helping spirits were very clear, and they said, this is the partner for you to choose if what you want to devote your life to is your spiritual evolution. She's the only person for you. And it will mean you won't have children, and you'll devote your life to this work. And they made it very clear for me. And that was the choice I made in her. And that's what the premise of our relationship is, for her and for me, is for both of us to unfold and become potentiated together. That's what we're up to. That's what we're doing
So
together.
it sounds like you're very happy. And soulmates, do you believe in soul? I have a soulmate. I have many, I think. One of them was Julie. The other one's my husband. But that's very special. It makes me emotional hearing that. I love that. How long have you been together?
20.
Oh, wow.
Almost 24 years.
Us too. 24.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. 20. No, so we met we met in 2001. What year are we in?
Yes. Yeah. Same with us. Oh my goodness.
Julie, March 2021. I mean, March 2001, just by chance.
September.
Okay. Same year. That was a bad year in a lot of ways, obviously, but just, I think that's great. We have that in common. Also, I love your name, which I told you. In closing, I do want to ask you this. So if one of my listeners is listening right now and they would like to connect with you, can you, I know they can find you on juliemkramer.com, but how else can they connect with you?
Yes. So I think people connect with me for different reasons.
Okay.
People often reach out to me so that I can refer them to my students.
Okay.
Who have completed the training program that I offer, which is a 3-year-long professional training for people to become shamanic or spiritual healers. We're in the process of building an online directory for those graduates, but currently people can just reach out to me through my website if they'd like a referral. And people, of course, contact me for training. And so my most public offering is a 3-day workshop that I offer for anyone. You can be a complete beginner, you can be a skeptic, you can be doubtful, you can be curious, you can be someone who's never had any contact with the spirit world or someone who's had multiple visitations. And what I teach people is the practice of shamanic journeying. So how to contact helping spirits by entering into a natural trance state. And I offer that virtually and also in various in-person locations. So people generally contact me because they want to learn. They want to develop skills for their own use, or because eventually they see themselves providing the service to others. And another wonderful referral source for people who are seeking healing.
Like me.
And this would be,
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you're also very welcome to contact me and I can provide
I have an in with this program, everyone. So there you go.
And there's a wonderful referral source that my teacher, Sandra Ingeman, created. It's called shamanicteachers.com. And you can search for practitioners there. And so that would be a wonderful resource for people who are victims of the fire, for example, or who have suffered other losses or tragedies and who feel that there's deeper healing, that there are deeper layers to their healing that they haven't accessed yet. And that could simply be because they haven't worked with the right practitioner yet who's looking at healing through this particular lens alongside all of the others. It's never meant as a substitute. It's always meant as a complementary modality.
Okay. I love that. And I'm so grateful I met you today, even though we had a really hard time getting on the podcast. It took us a solid, I think, 10 minutes, but it's been just a really great, much needed conversation. Julie, thank you so much. Everyone, if you're listening and you happen to be in LA and you're really blue or you're like, I mean, God forbid, lost your home, there's always hope. Like I say all the time, there's so many resources. So many of my listeners have reached out to me to check on me. I'm so grateful to all of you. Thank you. I'm good. We're good. There's a lot of smoke on in my city right now, and a lot of soot. Oh, I love dogs. That's a sign, by the way. I have two. I'm surprised they're not barking. That's a sign. Like I was going to say there's a lot of soot on my car, but I'm so grateful that I, knock on wood, have a home to go home to, and a car. And for all of you that don't, I just want you to know, like, my prayers, my thoughts, everything are with you, and there's always hope. And I'm just grateful to all my listeners. So if you're struggling with your mental health right now, there's always hope. In closing, thank you so much again, Julie. Keep going. You matter. Your story matters.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.